Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 6th member forum organized by PMI Sri Lanka chapter. On behalf of the board of directors, let me welcome each and every one of you for this fabulous gathering. Without take much more time, let me invite the president of PMI Sri Lanka chapter, Mr. Saman Kandaranache, to welcome all of you. Over to you, Mr. Kandaranache.
Thank you, Shantika. Thank you, Mr. Dave Davis, for accepting our invitation for today's session. Today, we are having our 5th virtual member forum for this year, after having our successful regional project management conference 31st May. And I hope this event today, the topic is very important topic about making the project charter success focused on. And I also like to remind you when next Friday, that means 20th June, Friday, we have a in-person session at PMICSL about the construction professional certification and awareness program. So I would like to invite also to join for that program. So let me hand over to Shivantika to proceed this session. So once again, I thank you as the president and on behalf of board of directors. I thank you, Mr. Dave Davis, to accept our invitation to deliver our today's session. Over to you, Shivantika.
Thank you, Mr. Kandaranache. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me invite the Executive Vice President of PMI Sri Lanka chapter, Mr. Dhammika Mendis, to deliver the speaker introduction. Over to you, Mr. Mendis.
Thanks, Shivantika. So I will introduce Dave. He is not a unknown person in the project management world. So Dave Davis is a practitioner of and a recognized professional in project and program management, leadership, change management, and business acumen. As a trailblazer and thought leader at PMI, Dave was the co-chair of developing the PMI Business Analyst Practice Guide, an advisor to the creation of PMI Communities of Practice, and value coach for promoting skills and competencies for the modern project professional. He currently is a senior program manager at Cincinnati Children's Health, creating change management process for the organization to help a project adoption while implementing the Workday Human Capital Management component of the application. Without much delay, I'm going to hand over the stage to Davis. Over to you, Dave.
Well, thank you. First of all, hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. We've had some relationships over the years where I've been involved with the chapter, so I'm glad to see that continue along. I'm very pleased with the relationship and the things your chapter is doing, etc. Besides on this topic, one, charter is pretty important aspect of the PMBOK guide, PMI processes, et cetera, and it's evolving, and there's some other things about it that it's getting older, so as it matures and some other things, some ways we need to go about it. So I'm going to look at things in really a little bit of a idea of the charter, the past, the present, and the future. So I'm going to be a little bit of what the charter kind of is, where I think it has some issues, and where I think it really needs to go to. And by the way, I've been involved in project management. I was certified last century, so I've got 26 years, I think, as a PMP. PMBOK Guide 2.3 I certified on. We had 8 sections of the exam. We had to chisel our answers in stone tablets and send them in, and etc. So it's been a long time. But let's talk about, again, the charter, what it is, what it needs to be, and things moving forward. And again, I will try to monitor the chat with the questions, but to raise a hand, and if need to, if you can interrupt me, say, Dave, there's a question, we'll go from there. So let's first of all, let's talk about the purpose of the charter. And some of these have a lot of text, but they're really there more for if you look at text afterward, we'll find a way to get copies of the slides to you. So lots of words here, but it basically boils down to the purpose of the charter is it really gives the project manager the authorization to do things. I'm going to jump to the next slide here pretty quickly. It authorizes the project manager to be a steward of company resources. It's basically your official approval to go ask people to help work on the project. For years, I've been involved with people. This is back in the old days, they actually called people, pick up phone calls, said, I'm Dave Davis, work on the project, and they're like, who are you and why are you calling me? I said, well, I'm the project manager. This charter authorizes me to start this work. And how can you help me succeed, or those sorts of things? So the charter in the beginning was, and still is, the authorization of the project manager to do work. And the charter shouldn't be a long, involved process. I mean, there's a desire to get charters out there pretty quickly to get the commitment of folks and et cetera. So again, the important thing is the charter pulls together is stewardship, that the project manager is able to use company resources to deliver some sort of strategic outcome. And that's basically it, not a whole lot of what all's going to have to happen to make it achieved, and all those other administrative bureaucratic things, history and all that, but go off and make it work. So what I've noticed over the years is, though, organizations have sort of taken their own adaptation and the cultural interpretation of what the charter means. And it leads to a lot of confusion. I've been in many different organizations over my 38 plus years of project management work. And there's some, I've actually been involved where a vice president thought that the charter should be updated throughout the whole life cycle of the project. You should go back and update the charter, and we scratched our heads and said, that's not what the PMBOK guide says. But that doesn't mean that people don't interpret that they don't see that as the right solution. We've also seen that it's only used at the beginning, that the charter is a document that's issued once and it doesn't really get modified afterward. This was the charter that you were authorized to go work from. There's different change control processes and other things that'll be utilized through the duration of the project as you deliver the outcomes and capabilities. Then there's another part that apparently all the executives agree to this charter, and it's already been baseline. Kind of interesting. I've been involved in projects where the charter wasn't baseline by some people until we were actually in the test and verification phase. We'd already done all the work and we still didn't have every one of the executive sponsors signed off on the charter. Getting them to sign up, and this is when we wanted ink on paper or type signature type thing. Getting them lined up to understand it was a problem. Getting the signature physically. I was in one organization once, wanted to get them all on the same sheet of paper. And gosh, that took forever to get the same sheet of paper because there were multiple organizations. And we were faxing and refaxing, so you know how long ago that was. And it became very bureaucratic to even get the charter baselined and everybody agreed to it. Then finally, there's the whole issue of what if we're different? There's a difference between the project plan and the charter. The charter is a very forward-looking project or view of things. As you get the details and dig down deeper into what the project delivery really is, it may differ from the project. There may be some things that were thought would be in the initial scope that as you look into it deeper, there may be a technical mismatch, there may be an expectation mismatch. It just can't deliver everything that you thought you could initially. I've also seen the opposite side. As you were looking at things, there's a big piece that was missed in the charter. So now we need to update it and add the scope and some of those different pieces. The charter, if it's a one-time, it should say that one time. The project plan and change management is what should be growing forward moving, or should be updated under change control moving forward. So got a little bit of confusion here on where some of these things look at it. And so let's spend a second on currently, it started at the beginning to authorize a project manager, is what I said. And most organizations, and I'd say this is common in a lot of organizations, have some sort of a business funnel that things get approved, that there's some sort of ideation. We socialize, we figure out what it is. And then there's actually a demand created. I've been in organizations where people put in a quote demand. We actually use ServiceNow as our tool, and they would create a demand record in ServiceNow, which gives the business case, rough order of magnitude, and where it's going to fit organization. And then we have some people go off and do some sort of discovery session, is it technical feasibility, the scope, what's our outcome capabilities. And all these take time, by the way. These do take a significant amount of time and pretty high power resources. So what we've done here is we've ideation, formulate the idea, then we start to improve in the business side, the approval. So we have some sort of executive buy-in. Yeah, it's worth doing. No, it isn't worth doing. What's the impact, etc. And this isn't just one demand going through. There's lots of things going on. So there's prioritization. And what drives most work are budget cycles. Most organizations have annual budgets and maybe quarterly update and review of the budgets. So the budget cycle has a lot to do with where projects start, kick off, etc. And then we actually have a selection process, which means some group somewhere decides, yes, we're going to make this, we're going to deliver that work. And then all of a sudden, a charter should appear. So there's a whole bunch of work that happens. And then all of a sudden, there's this one document or one artifact, a charter that says, okay, go off and do the work. So this could be up to 18 months, maybe even I've seen 2 years of major projects where it's gone through to get to this level of definition and approval. And then a charter appears. And suddenly, is the charter going to be able to capture all this, et cetera, et cetera? And I'd say no, because one, it's a lot of stuff. And two, as I'll get into some things with the charter itself, there's some issues with the charter. First issue, what I just described is a long, painful investment approval process. There are lots of steps in there. It's bloated. There's lots of different evaluations. You may be evaluating technologies and have 4 or 5 different vendors competing and have RFPs, request for proposals, where you get responses and then you get offers, you get demos, you get this stuff, you get that, then you do a best and final offer, then evaluate the best and final. A lot of bloat, bureaucratic bloat to get to that point. And a lot of it's redundant information. The business case may have some things to do with some resource pieces, but then there's a resource plan. And are they always in sync? Not necessarily. Are we going to outsource this, build or buy? Some of those things all come into that investment approval. So there's a lot of things that people somehow want the charter to capture this that doesn't belong in the charter. The charter's job is you're authorized to make the outcomes and capabilities delivered. It's not to document the approval process. Another thing, the charters try to do too much. A lot of charters say what's not in scope, out of scope. Well, there's lots of things not in scope. But so how do we decide what's not in scope? What else is it trying to do? Is it trying to do true transformation, that we're defining the transformation objective and not where does this fit in as a piece of that big puzzle or a stone in the mosaic? What exactly are we trying to do with this charter? And has it gotten so big that nobody's going to read it? I was in an organization once that had a template for a charter. This is a lot of organizations have done this. This wasn't that long ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago. The template, just the template of the charter was 22 pages of a Word document. Now, if you've got, let's say, 10 executives that are expected to do this, and the template's 22 pages, and let's be generous and say that they only had enough text that it doubles it. So you have 44 pages in a charter, 10 people approving it. That means 440 pages need to be read and approved. And of course, there won't be questions or that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff that it's trying to do. And you have to really wonder, what's the value of each of those pieces? And then the next part is very few of these charters really align with benefits realization model. There may be some words with some sort of ROI or some sort of financial benefit to the organization, but truly, where are the savings coming from? Whose budgets are going to be able to do that on it? Aren't there. And those are critical parts to the business of why we're undertaking this initiative to deliver value, outcomes, capabilities. So it's missing a big piece there. And That has to be key to why we've even authorized this work. Okay, it's going to save us $5 million. Where is it going to save us $5 million? And I've done benefits realization for years. And a lot of times, benefits realization, the person not in a meeting gets assigned that they'll give up all, that they'll realize all the benefits and they'll give up budget money. So it becomes a very political piece on the benefits realization, but it needs to be there somewhere along the line. And if it's not done up front, then that means it's going to take some time from delivering the project itself. So part of the reason why projects start out behind, a little bit behind, is some of this stuff hasn't been done. It should have been done at the approval stage. And then finally, what is the definition of done? Not, oh, the product will do this, blah, 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 but how is it going to be accepted? What's our transition to operations? And what are our KPIs? How we measure the success of our business? Have we defined where those are going to be impacted and what outcomes and capabilities map to what KPIs are going to be there? That's rarely in the charter. As a matter of fact, I've never seen that in a charter in my 38 plus years of experience as a project manager. So there's some issues with the charter. But to me, the biggest problem is they seem to think it should be created by the project manager. Now, we're authorizing the project manager to do work. I think we all agree that that's a charter definition in PMI. And if you go and chat GPT and ask AI, they'll say the same thing in lots of places. But the person that's authorized to do work now shouldn't be defining what work they should be doing. That should have been done for them. They should be going off and implementing a charter, not creating the charter and then implementing it. Being given the charter, then use that as direction to do lots of complex stuff, to move work along the line, to deliver benefits, outcomes, values, capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other big issue is once you have this document, it's not the source of truth. In other words, if the business case changes, the charter doesn't get updated. If we suddenly have a different supplier than what we had initially, does the charter get updated? Is the charter only valuable for a short period of time as we assemble the project team and truly get the project kicked off? If that's the case, we are spending lots of energy developing a document that has a very short lifespan. And it doesn't grow and evolve and et cetera. I'll use the PMI term, progressive elaboration. It doesn't do that. It has one progression. It's developed, we go up, we say, we're going to go off and do it, we're going to commit resources. Then there's a whole bunch of other things to get the project going. And then you at the other side, well, it's not that big a deal. I mean, all the more it is cut and paste. Well, cut and paste doesn't add a whole heck of a lot of that. And yeah, it's just cut and paste is easy to say, but it's a lot of work to do that. And what we're doing is a lot of times we got 18-month-old data that we're cutting and pasting from. We don't necessarily track the history of how we got here. This business case could have been under 3 different managers ago, 3 different product owners, 3 different pieces. It could have been under a different transformation plan. There could be lots of things from that old data. But hey, just a cut and paste. We're just going to make sure we got a lot of stuff in that charter. Some charters like to have org charts. And that makes an assumption that the organizations will stay the same. And org charts, although they're nice, they're visual, you can really fit them all on one page. And then it's like, if you have a tool such as a Workday or a PeopleSoft that does graphic org charts, it rarely has the delineation you need. It's usually big and you have to scaling it down and et cetera. Can't fit it on one page, et cetera. It doesn't have some things, justifications. It has extraneous information, and it really should drive to a project plan. So some of my complaints of the cut and paste idea, a thicker document doesn't make it a better document. If I go back to my 20-some page template, yeah, it talks about a lot of things, but we need to focus on the value. We are dealing in all our lives, and too many things, we're dealing with lots of quote noise, unquote, and we need to keep it focused. So we have to filter out old information. And we don't know if we've even replaced it with new and better information. And it delays the starting the project. A project charter can't be done in isolation. To say project manager go out and do a charter, just cut and paste, and that you're still going to have to review it with key stakeholders. I mean, the project manager usually has a core team of leaders, then there's usually steering committees and some of that. You need to be able to have that input from other key stakeholders to develop the charter. And then finally, we still haven't defined what does success look like. We've defined that we're developing something, but have we defined it successful? There's many examples throughout history, and we can do some fairly recently, especially in the .com world, et cetera, where the product ended up exactly per spec, exactly what was wanted, but there was no adoption by the market. So success doesn't necessarily mean that the product meet technical specifications, but does it meet business need and give us business value? Now I'm going to jump for a second here into, and I'm project management standards. This is from PMBOK Guide 6.0. We went to 7.0 in principle, but we redid then 6.0 and something, and we called it its own special document on methods and some of those things. But they talk about 9 subsidiary project management plans. We don't talk about a project plan. We have a project plan with 9 subsidiary plans. And quite frankly, it could be argued that the overall project plan is the integration knowledge area. So there's 9 different pieces of work. You can't be working on 9 things at the same time. So where does all this fit in? And does it really need to be part of the charter? So I'm going to change now a little bit to where I see the view the future needs to be. So we set up in the past that the charter was a good idea time, but there was a lot of bloat, a lot of cut and paste, a lot of things that were historical. I think it needs, I don't think you need to get rid of these things. These things here you definitely need to have. Now, do you call them these things? Not necessarily. But long, elongated Word documents or written documents that are pages and pages long are rarely read thoroughly. People are looking for brief summaries. They're looking for the PowerPoint bullet points. And so I suggest that the charter is an input into other things. And I say the main thing that drives this, and I just made up this term, but a dynamic project blueprint. I purposely avoided the term plan because we already got a bunch of plans out here. But this is how we're going to do the job. These are how we're going to bring different people together. So all these pieces were in there before. You know, we had different management plans, we had supplemental, we had baseline, we had additional components. These might be technical specifications from a vendor. Other project documents that may fit in. There may be non-disclosure documents, some of those other pieces that'll fit in. But this dynamic project plan is a summary to get people up to a level of awareness. Not only do they have commitment, but they also have a vested commitment. They have the awareness for the commitment to make it happen. So I suggest project manager, first thing you need to do is get that small team together and develop the project plan. But with that, this charter, if they still need to do the charter, or whoever delivers the charter needs to make sure that in order for this to be successful, that it is results focused, not the past, but the future. By results focused, it's an organization of the project, it's a wrapper. So it needs to go back to a approval pipeline, but also if you're in a PMO, it needs to relate to the administrative things in your PMO and your PMO processes. I just use the term project ID as a generic placeholder for the governance administration of projects within a PMO. They can't all be Joe's project, Bill's project, Sue's project, et cetera. They need to be, we have structure around those. They need to be results focused in what does success look like. And by that, I have 3 items here. Critical success factors. The operations need to be involved here up front. Oftentimes, I've been an operations manager, and more than once, there were projects thrown over the wall at us. We'd get calls to the help desk saying, how do I do such and such? And we didn't even know that had gone into production. We didn't even know it was being worked on. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. So operations have some definition in critical success factors, as should the product owners and the major stakeholders. The ones that own KPIs, the ones that own the benefits, need to be involved in the success factors. How do we measure this success? Well, we didn't get too many calls into the help desk. You know, nobody wanted to come down and riot outside, protest outside our building. Those aren't necessarily good success factors. How do we measure it? Is it improved ROI? Is it better response time support? Is it fewer returns of the product? What are those different pieces? And then, have we met external legal requirements? A lot of projects in all countries have to conform to government type regulation. Government mandates come down. You need to be able to do those to keep in business. And so there's external, there's legal requirements. There's also contracts with vendors and suppliers and customers. So you need to make sure we meet those requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see me hit this one again. What benefits are being realized? Benefits realization is within the program management standard. It's one of the 5 key components of program management. But that clearly needs to drive why we're doing a project. What are our outcomes and capabilities? If we don't know the benefits of why we're doing the work, we can't measure the benefits of what we did. So how do we know if we're successful or not? And quite frankly, why are we doing it? Because no project is cheap. If we get to the point where we actually invest in a project manager, we're using a lot of resources, lots of resource hours, et cetera. And even in organizations where you have same project manager doing 4 or 5 different projects, which that's a whole nother discussion on resource we won't even talk about. Still 20%, 5 projects with project manager, 20% of their time on a project is still a significant amount of time. That's 8 hours a week for a 40-hour work week. So there's a lot of investment there. And then with that, organizational, what are our RACIs? I'm assuming you have the project management understanding of the RACI with the responsible, accountable, consultative, informative. Who's doing the work? Who's responsible to make it happen? Who needs to be involved? And who do we just need to be informed? But you need to have that sponsor. You need to have them identified. And you need to clearly state a single accountable person. Still in this 2024, I'm still having organizations saying, well, it's shared between these 2 people. No, it can only be one. Oh, but we talk with each other all the time. Just experienced this 2 weeks ago. One of them was on vacation. I can't approve it until somebody else comes back. So then then I'm at a standstill. It's a delay. Oh no, they'll be back and they'll approve when they get back. Gets into a lot of cycles, time, et cetera. There's reasons some of those disciplines are put in place. And yeah, I understand that sharing, et cetera, responsibilities, have discussions, each can speak to it, et cetera, but a single accountable person can have many people involved for responsible, but without those pieces, and that's where within the charter, we'll talk about this a little bit later, that RACI needs to identify accountability because they're the ones that ultimately make decisions for how the product is, how we do the product, develop it, create it, what the product will look like when it's accepted, how the organization will look like once it's done. Those are all components that need to be in here in our charter that helps us, that's going to drive this project blueprint. And finally, what is the time frame? I'll go back to budget cycles. If we've budgeted that we support this for 1 year, then our time frame is 1 year, correct? No, it's a multi-year budget. Okay, so then what should we have delivered within this first budget cycle? If the answer is it doesn't matter, okay, then we set that in the time frame, and that should be outlined. Because again, budget cycles are very critical to the whole project portfolio delivery world. So where we're at right at the moment, then, we're looking in the rearview mirror as we get things with our project charter, et cetera. We're looking at times and scopes, cost budgets, like org strikers, stakeholders, and the sign-off and assumptions. Assumption I put here as a snide remark, like it's everyone's #1 priority and objective. I've been involved in a major initiative for a Fortune 10 company, of which one organization says, we aren't going to have resources for that for 4 months. And they're like, just ignore it. Go ahead and do it anyway and get them involved. Well, that failed. But we need to look at these things in the future. not in the rearview mirror in the past. We need to look at what are our risks, and I'll talk about risk a little bit more. We need to look at how are we going to govern the project? In other words, how are the people going to work together? How are we going to track items? How are we going to bring the resolution? How are we going to be able to get agreement that an assumption was realized or not realized? How are we going to make sure we comply to all these regulations, including our own processes? By the way, I'm going to hit all these different terms that it goes through. But I like to anchor this on journeys. I like to turn journeys to be able to bring a human element or an external element into the different touch points. Where do we actually, and that's what we're working on, right? We're developing things within the touch points. So let's focus on our touch points and how can we make sure they're successful? Because without those successful touch points, we're not going to realize the benefits. So let me go into a little bit more detail of this dynamic project blueprint. By the way, there's a part of the Project Management Guide 7, PMI Guide 7, called the Cone of Uncertainty. And that's one of the 8 performing domains. And the project manager's one of the primary roles is to reduce that cone of uncertainty. And that's to eliminate confusions, to help decisions be made, get all these things communicated, making people aware, being proactive on potential problems, getting answers to questions, and other different considerations. So that's what this graphic is here for, is we need to reduce that cone of uncertainty. So that's an implied piece of this whole blueprint. So I propose this blueprint is a kickoff deck. People like kickoffs. Decks should be short, fairly simple, focus on just a little bit at one time, and focus not, oh, go to page 27 and look at this stuff, then jump back to page 14, then jump to page 30. That's not focus. That's all over the place. And people like decks, PowerPoint decks, they like to forward them. There's a lot of issues around that and people's biases and et cetera. But what I'm seeing this blueprint is at a project kickoff, this is the deck that you're going to go through. And this deck is created by a small dedicated team. So this is where the project manager is able to get somebody from product ownership. It's probably somebody from operations, maybe somebody from a change management team, but a small dedicated team can help drive these different pieces. And then this deck focuses on the outcomes and capabilities. How will we do business when the project is completed? Wow, this has nothing to do with how we develop the product, but it's important for success. And by the way, I purposely took off the question marks because I've read something here recently that in the day of texting that punctuation is confusing people. So, okay, I did that for here just so I didn't have to type in 3 questions. How do we measure support the completed project? That's back to my KPIs. How is the business going to measure success? I'd like to, and I had this experience once when I was doing working with a Scrum team, where I went to the developer and asked them, this functionality you're working on, this story that you're working on, which is a very important story, how are we measuring success in production? What KPIs is it supporting? And the developers started with, what's a KPI? There's a disconnect here. We need to understand what our product is putting out there, data that's being used to measure the success. So this is where we need to focus on the definition of success, not necessarily what the product, because I've seen charters will say, we will be able to put items in a shopping cart, an electronic shopping cart, and then review the shopping cart and then click submit. Okay, those are all great. What does that measure? How do we measure that? And then how will we do the work to complete the project? That's the project team. Those are the knowledge workers, developers, the testers, and if you're not in an IT world, the ones actually on an assembly line putting together a product. If you're in R&D, the ones doing clinical research tests, et cetera, et cetera. But how will we do the work to complete the project? Who's responsible for this artifact to drive other things? What organizations need to be in? So that's where I say focus on the definition of the outcomes and capability. And a lot of times we have formal PMOs that have formal processes and et cetera, and say that we're conforming to the PMO process. Or We're doing transformation. There's a lot of unknowns, so we are going to be navigating new territory as we go through there. And then we need to look at how are we going to make sure we do the project right? And that gets into some of those compliance things I talked about before. Audit trails, some of those different pieces we need to do. So we need to make sure that's in there. How do we make sure that, this one, how do we make sure the value is delivering the benefits? And the next one, how do we make sure that what we're doing is the right stuff? And then the next one, who will do the work? Again, are there commitment from organization? Do we know what our true resource needs are in different places? Years ago, we used to do a skills analysis of what we need for people in projects. And I remember doing a long-gated one. It's really a good one. And I took the skills that they needed. This was back to show my age. They need SQL skills. They need to use crystal report writer, blah, blah, blah. And I go to a functional manager and he looks at it and says, this is all great, but the only person I have available is Bob. So Bob's assigned to your project. So then why did I bother with the skills assessment? And that's kind of how it happens today. And then adoption. How will we prepare workers to adopt the outcomes and the capabilities? And then finally, what are the work processes in the end and how does everything interact? So this is what we're talking about now here. And then we can now start delivering project value. So we don't have an elongated work where we're focused on different parts. Now there can be other ones that can ebb and flow on the culture of the organization, the complexity of the project, and all those other things. By the way, there's other stuff in here I don't talk about, this kind of pre-project work, such as complexity assessment, business analysis type work, if you're doing true SWOT analysis. I often have discussions with business analysts about how they want to go off and do this market SWOT analysis and everything. I think that's all great and wonderful, but I think that ship has left. I have yet to see a project, once it's been started, where we can do a SWOT analysis and go back to the product owner and say, hey, we did a SWOT analysis and we think we have a problem and you should change the scope. No, we've already authorized X number of dollars to be spent by December 31st. Here it is March 31st. We don't have time. We're going to go with what we. So I'm going to go into some different parts. And these are, I'll just say that they're decks or they're pieces. And I'm not going to read these for you line by line. Like I said, you should be able to get the slides to look at this. But one of the first things we need to have in this blueprint is a definition of done. So this is success focused. Our prioritized scope and functionality. I firmly believe we should focus in on what is being delivered. What is out of scope needs to be somewhere, but I don't think it should be in the document of what we're delivering. We should be focusing on what we're delivering, what we're not delivering. And I'm not saying that that doesn't need to be somewhere. But I'm not sure that we need, hey, go read the scope document to figure out what we're doing, and they read a bunch of things that we're not doing. Availability management. Now, these are different pieces and what they need in order to do their job. Knowledge transfer. When all is said and done, how do we capture our knowledge? And these can be things such as SLAs, interface agreements, technical processes, some of that. Our KPIs, our key performance indicators, how are we going to measure these things? What are potential impacts? SLAs, capacity management, both human capacity, technical capacity of the end product. And then who are our community partners for communication and the major milestones? So this is one component of that blueprint. The next is compliance. Legal requirements, I use some that are specific to the United States. PCI, for those not familiar, that's card processing credit card payment. HIPAA has to do with healthcare practices. We all have our own legal requirements. I'm familiar with the United States domain. General accepted practices, GAAP, for those not familiar, general accepted accounting principles, IEEE, the International Electrical Engineers Standards. So we need to make sure that we're complying with all these things. Some of our tech constraints, things such as data integrity. Hey, guess what? This is going to require downtime. We are required to do rollover plans, disaster recovery plans, some of those things. And then clearly more and more important, security. Where does security fit in to all these different pieces? And this can be physical security, cybersecurity, intellectual property security, some of those different pieces. Next, our project governance. How are we as an organization, I'll say our PMO, going to governance? So we usually have defined ways of doing business in a PMO. Are we utilizing those? Or is this so different that we're not going to utilize those? Or we're going to do a hybrid? And a lot of times we end up being confused and not communicating this. Everybody has their own interpretation. And you end up with a digital disjunctor. How many of you said, well, we're going to put a team site out there? And all of a sudden, 2 months later, you can't find anything on the team site because there's no structure to it. People weren't given guidelines. People have made this interpretation and put this document here and this document there and some other things. And we need to have some structure around all our artifacts, especially if we go back to audit trails, some of that stuff. Next part of governance, how are we going to do progression? How are we going to track things? How are we going to make sure we have decisions documented? How are we going to do risk mitigation? How are we going to implement it? What are our trigger points for risk? Bases, I talked about that before. What is a value proposition for our customer? What is a value proposition for the organization? And then sustainability. Can we sustain this product? Or is it just out the door and we'll figure it out as we go? Obviously, I wanted to have some sustainability ideas in here. Next thing are resources. And this is not just physical resources, usually we look at people, but also technical resources. So again, what organizations are involved, what skill sets are needed. Hey, if we're testing, if we're going to bring in people, what people are going to bring in, how are we going to get them trained, some of that. But these are all upfront things that we are going to define, not that they're defined at this point in time, but these are things we're going to need your help, key stakeholders, in making sure we got them defined and implemented properly. And then the whole transition to operations. Yeah, we did the greatest project in the world, but guess what? There's nobody to give it to for operations, or we're not involving them until 2 weeks before we go live. And there's some things that don't support their way of doing business, or we don't have channels defined, et cetera, et cetera. What's the adoption strategy of human beings? This is human beings adopting the outcomes and capabilities of our product. And the outcomes and capabilities adoption will drive the benefit KPI success measures completion. I have been, this was years ago, back in the 90s, so based on this story of Yale Television, founded a major communication company where we did circuit engineering, telecommunications. And we had a great big development effort, and we put out these Sun Microsystem big Unix boxes with big visual interfaces with multiple windows and a mouse. And we put it on desktops, said, look at this great thing. They pick up the mouse, said, what the heck is this? I just use keystrokes. I don't want this visual. I just want to be able to heads down typing keystrokes. Completely missed adoption. But we need to make sure the strategic alignment, organizational change management. And by the way, I apologize for change not being spelled properly. I'm going to blame my spell check, but it's actually my fault. What's our competitive event? What's our value stream? And all our projects should align to the company value stream. And where do we fit in? Side note, but I have a different series of presentations on this. We should map our lessons learned, our value stream. We should have our value stream of our products be a driving force for everything we do. Next piece is risk. Now, there's a cultural aspect of risk. A lot of organizations say they do risk mitigation, but they really don't. They want to, but it gets in the way. For example, I think there's a flow of risk. I think at the beginning, we list a bunch of assumptions, right? An assumption should be validated. And I also think that if it's not validated within a certain time, it's a risk. If, oh no, we don't need to worry about that, then why do we list it as an assumption? We need to see where that fits in. And risks need to be tracked by their own risk mitigation tracking plan. I'm a big lover of the acronym RAID, risk, action items, issues, and decisions, or whatever you want to call those documents. But risk is not an issue. Risk is its own separate item. It's a monitoring of things. It is not telling somebody that they're wrong. A risk is assigned to you to mitigate. It's not because performance. The risk is a potential problem. And there's also, they talk about positive risk, opportunities. Let's not get in there too much. But not only identifying the risk, but tracking the risk. And then I talked a little bit about the risk mitigation culture. And then empowerment, people to be able to identify risk or claim that a risk has been happened. I was just in a project where high level, that's a charter, they called it. They said risk mitigation. If a executive leaves the organization, we will use the standard succession plan. Well, a vice president left the organization, never was acknowledged, nothing about following the mitigation plan. We had somebody temporarily in charge for like 4 months. We never did say when it was up. We did nothing. We had the words somewhere, but we didn't follow through. So risk should be there in the beginning. And then, like I said, also journeys. And journeys identify touch points. By the way, I stole this picture in the credits down here of just a user visits the theater. Touch point 1, touch point 2, touch point 3, touch point 4. Touch points, to me, there were people talk to people talk to a system talks to the people, or systems talk to the system. And we can do journeys in a lot of different ways. Most of the journey knowledge, et cetera, is focused along people journeys. The others can be called different things. I've heard terms like use cases and some of that. Those are all important, but journey should be identified. Those should be what's driving things. Where does it fit into a journey? Again, that goes back to our value streams, our other different streams that we have, our KPIs, et cetera, et cetera. We should be able to map those things together. The blueprint should say, we understand we need to map these things together. We're going to dedicate time to it. And then there's other types of journeys with personas. Personas are trying to give a human face, a name, et cetera, to it moving forward. And then what's the post-production thing? So let me summarize this in just one big little document or one page. Again, I kind of like one pages. All these things I just talked about are in these boxes. The drive supported by that initial discovery planning. So got people together. We talked about some of these things. We shared with what some of our major bullet points are. We're moving these forward. We need your support and help. And then that drives, once we've done that initial discovery planning, that's what drives this dynamic project blueprint. I've already been authorized as a project manager to do it. Yes, I've got a bunch of subsidiary project manager plans I need to do, but this is going to be able to bridge it in succinct, consumable chunks that you can forward and share. I'm going to give you a couple examples of some things. I talked about a simple charter. This next one is a one-page charter I did for project. And this is actually one from one I did. So don't pay too much attention to names and dates. But rather than 44 pages, I did it in one slide that people could look at and respond to. So my business case, my goal, the timeline, the program scope, the problem statement, the program scope, stakeholders and key project members. And then there's lots of other supporting documentation. So this is one piece that helps make that charter more successful. Another item, we put together work streams. We use this term vision boxes. Each one of these had their own set of work packages, activities, etc. We put the graphical here with a vision box that could drill down into each of the different pieces. The visual helped us focus our work where these different things are. And actually we had some project radiators when we were done tracking the different work streams. There is no project that is just one single work stream. There's all sorts of overlapping different work streams throughout the project. This was a definition of done of a particular piece of the project. So there were many different definitions of done because there were different major pieces of functionality that were involved and included. And then in a different project, this was availability management from an operations group. The operations group told me what their value-added benefits were, what the implementation risks were, what the critical success factors were and what their KPIs were. So the project manager, I worked with them on doing this. I didn't do it myself. They owned it. They owned the document. It took them a while. It took a couple of weeks to do this. But rather than spend time doing a charter, blah, 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 then going off and doing it, we brought them into it front. And it was key in our transition operations. And when I say transition with operations, what do I mean? Transition actually has a couple different components. First one, it's ensuring the initiative outputs are fit for purpose and can be integrated into business operations, the face of the customer. And that could be marketing, it can be usually production support or product support, help desk support, some of those different things. Service technicians going out delivering. Tracking and reporting the benefit realizations at an initiative level and taking appropriate actions where required. We have benefits management. That means we have tolerance levels. Are we running hot? Are we getting close? Doing trending, negative? What corrective action do we need to have? And then finally, the last one, so important, winning the hearts and minds of the players. And going beyond processes and practices, consider the softer side. Operations folks were very appreciative that they were involved early. More than once I heard the comment, well, we're usually not told till it's too late. And it's not just them, lots of different places, change management, I hear this a lot. Even when we have some Scrum meetings and some of that stuff, an iteration that's focused on better understanding a business component. The example I'll use, involved in a product that was involving amortization of mortgages. Developers didn't know it that well, so we brought in some business folks to be able to do a short training session on amortization. So that's where winning hearts and minds comes in. Now I'm going to do one last little transition here as we talk about charter. And I've been focused on the charter itself at delivering the outcomes and capabilities. But there's also a team charter that's very popular, especially in the Agile/Scrum world. And I like team charters. I talked about before about getting a small team together. A team charter is how the team works. So I think, the team charter should develop. And it's kind of a document that explains what are our values going to be, how are we going to communicate, what's our decision-making criteria, conflict resolution, which is important. What are our meeting guidelines? I'll give you a simple example of a very good meeting guideline. There's a Muppet character called Elmo. And Elmo is an acronym for enough, let's move on. We've all been involved in meetings where people just kept bringing up another point on the same topic, another point on the same, kept going on and on the same topic. People are allowed in Elmo to declare, we've talked about this enough, let's move on, let's move it to a parking lot, another meeting, whatever. And then our agreements. And it also establishes guidelines for the sharing of the resources. How does that team work? If we're doing FISTA 5, what's our approval process? Is that going to be FISTA 5? Some of those pieces. So I'm going to summarize from a quote from one of my favorite books, and it also kind of applies to this for charters in general. And that is from the book To Kill a Mockingbird. This is a very popular book in the United States, place like actually global footprint. But there was a judge in there, and the story is about a little girl, a young lady, I should probably say, that's learning the realities of the legal process. And she's having a discussion. Here's a judge say, the people generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for. So back to our charter focus, if we focus on success, that's really, in my mind, what people are looking for is how are we going to be successful here? So if we have lots of other stuff, noise, to use that term again, and people aren't hearing things about success, the adoption, winning hearts and minds is going to hurt. You need to be able to have an idea and empathy of what people may be looking for and provide that so your communication is much more effective. So with that, thank you for spending time listening to me talk about changing the focus of the charter a little bit, being focused on success of the outcomes and capabilities, adoption. Not that charters are bad, but we need to make sure we spend our time valuably on delivering value and making sure all the key stakeholders we're winning their hearts and minds. So thank you, and I guess I turn this back to somebody.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions from the audience?
Ladies and gentlemen, now your opportunity to ask questions from our keynote speaker. You can use our chat box or else you can raise your hands. So the stage is open.
And I do have one question for you. Distribution of slides. I can get you a copy of the slide item, you know, it'd be a PDF file. I'm not sure how you would distribute it. I do see a hand raised.
Yes,
Hi,
Mr.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Thank you for very informative presentation and the speech. I just asked 2 questions about the project charter. Sometimes project charter we initiated at the beginning and take it as a static document. And
Yes.
it's a misconception that sometimes that it is not changing and just keep a static document, we are not reviewing. So in your experience, how important is project charter review? Because while project is moving forward, sometimes project need to stop or kill. In your experience, can you suggest how?
It's important, but more important is the ongoing governance, change control, and et cetera. The content, a lot of times it gets into scope, and a lot of times there's action items, things that come from that review. There's not a lot of resolution there, but just getting an idea of what are the questions and concerns to be able to focus on it is extremely important. But it needs to be focused. That's one of my challenges. If it's a 48-page document, being able to review that in a timely manner and keeping people's attention, especially if you're trying to get executives. I mean, get executive to review a 48-page document just isn't going to happen. So I think it's important to review what it is we're trying to do, but not necessarily the quote charter unquote is the right format to do it. I propose this little deck I call a blueprint is a better vehicle to drive that discussion. But clearly we're saying the same thing. So my experience has been, it's been good, and it often brings more questions that need to be resolved as opposed to decisions. And all of a sudden you find another group needs to be involved. You read the room. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions, please?
I will stop sharing. So you can
I think our friend Mr. Lee Lambert also in the call.
Yeah, it's great to see Lee join with us.
Lee, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's always good to be here and listen to Dave go on. He's got a lot of knowledge.
Lee, why don't you open your camera? You like to see your face?
Don't get scared. Don't get scared.
Hi.
There it is. How you doing, guys?
How are you?
I'm well. I'm doing very well. I'm missing you guys.
Me too.
Thanks for joining with us, Lee.
My pleasure. You know it is.
Yes. If you do not have any question, I think Dhammika, do we need to wait? Right. So now we have come to the end of the session. So it is now time to deliver the certificate of appreciation to our keynote speaker. To deliver the appreciation of the participation, our keynote speaker, Dave, I would like to invite Executive Vice President of PMI Sri Lanka Chapter, Mr. Dhammika Mendes.
Okay. Thanks, Shivantika. in appreciation of your valuable insights, experience and expertise shared with us today in this member forum, we would like to present the certificate of appreciation to Dave Davis. We will email you the PDF version of this. And thank you on behalf of Project Management Institute, Colombo, Sri Lanka chapter. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for the extra bonus of Lee being here. Lee and I only live a few miles apart, but we only see each other thousands of miles away. So thank you.
Thank you very much, our keynote speaker, Dave, for your insightful and enlightening session. It added more colors to our event. So now it's time for us to wrap up the session. So on behalf of PMI Board of Directors, please
show the PD code here also.
Good. Yes, so yeah, as you can see, the PD code has displayed in the screen, so you can claim it. And same time, don't worry, we're going to email this PD code to your personal email IDs, which you have shared in the registration form. Before we wrap up, what about to take a group photo? So if you're in a position to switch on your camera, please do so, so we can catch your beautiful smile. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you everyone for joining with us. So until we meet again in the next session, actually we have another physical event on 28th. We are going to have a joint collaborative meeting with Institute of Engineering Sri Lanka. And so I invite all of you to participate with that. And until we meet our next meeting in July, stay inspired and stay motivated. Thank you. See you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Lee. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.